Beneath the golden sands of Egypt, where the sun scorches the land by day and the desert winds whisper through ruins by night, something ancient stirs. This is a land of monuments and mysteries, where colossal statues gaze blankly into eternity, and tombs carved into stone hide more than the bones of the dead. For centuries, archaeologists and adventurers have uncovered relics of an extraordinary civilization, only to find themselves haunted not just by history, but by something colder, something watching. These are not just tombs, they are warnings. In this video, we journey into the heart of Egypt's most enigmatic and unsettling sites, places where curses are etched into the walls, where kings and commoners alike seem to reach beyond the grave. From eerily preserved shrines and cryptic inscriptions to sudden misfortunes that plague those who dare disturb the dead, the line between superstition and truth begins to blur. Are these ancient protections against desecration, or something darker still? In the dry stretch of desert that cradles the ancient city of Amarna, there is an eerie silence. The golden sands cover more than just stone and time. They conceal a story that has unsettled archaeologists for over a century. This is the tale of the Pharaoh's shrine at Amarna, a place where history, religion, and mystery collide beneath a scorching Egyptian sun. Amarna, once known as Akhetaten, was the short-lived capital city built by Pharaoh Akhenaten during the 14th century BCE. His reign was unlike any other. Akhenaten rejected Egypt's traditional pantheon and instead worshipped a single deity, the Akheten, the sun disk. In doing so, he disrupted millennia of religious practice and set himself apart from every pharaoh before him. When he died, his city was abandoned, and his name was nearly erased from history. But ruins, even buried in sand, do not forget so easily. In the early 20th century, when European archaeologists turned their attention to Amarna, they didn't just find crumbling walls and shattered altars. They found something stranger, a shrine dedicated to Akhenaten that seemed almost untouched by time, as though it had been waiting to be rediscovered. And with its discovery came whispers of misfortune. Even before the first stones were moved, there was something about the place that made people uneasy. The air around the shrine felt different, thick, heavy, and unnaturally still, as though the desert itself was holding its breath. Tools were dropped, broken, or misplaced more often than usual, and there were quiet rumors of sudden fevers and restless sleep among the excavation team. Nothing ever happened that could be called truly supernatural, but no one could shake the feeling that something about the shrine didn't want to be disturbed. It wasn't fear in the traditional sense. It was tension, like the silence before a storm. And with every layer of sand removed, the feeling only grew stronger. The shrine, now known among Egyptologists as part of the central city of Amarna, contained vivid carvings of Akhenaten and his queen, Nefertiti, worshipping the Akheten. The art was unusual, almost otherworldly. Elongated skulls, androgynous figures, and scenes of almost intimate devotion filled the walls. Even the pharaoh's children were depicted with odd, exaggerated features. To those unfamiliar with Amarna-style art, it felt unsettling. Some even called it alien. What troubled the archaeologists most was the layout of the shrine itself. It didn't follow the traditional patterns seen in royal tombs. There were no clear paths for the soul's journey to the afterlife. No Osiris, no Anubis. The tomb was entirely Aten-centric, a spiritual anomaly in the context of ancient Egyptian belief. Some scholars speculated that the shrine may have been left unfinished, abandoned after Akhenaten's death during the chaotic collapse of his religious movement. Others wondered if it had been intentionally sealed or hidden, not to preserve it, but to keep something in. The shrine's layout was also different from the traditional Egyptian temple design. Rather than the dark, enclosed sanctuaries of older temples, Akhenaten's shrine was open to the sun, flooded with light. The Aten was a god without a face, a deity without myth or personality, and yet it demanded absolute devotion. This theological shift was not just symbolic, it was totalitarian. And when the traditional priesthood regained power after Akhenaten's death, they erased nearly every trace of the Aten religion, burying shrines, smashing statues, and leaving places like Amarna to rot. By the time British archaeologist Flinders Petrie arrived in Amarna in 1891, he was among the first to carefully excavate the site using more scientific methods. What he and later teams found at the shrine sparked a quiet but growing unease among researchers, not because of a formal curse, like that of Tutankhamun's tomb, but because of the atmosphere itself. The site was strangely preserved, and many of the remains of ritual activity were still in place. It felt, some said, like the ceremonies had just ended. Among the artifacts unearthed at the site were fragments of alabaster statues, strange offering tables and wall paintings, unlike those found in any other tombs. The iconography was stark rays of the sun, extending down like fingers, ending in tiny hands bestowing ankhs, the symbol of life. But the faces beneath them were obliterated. The visual violence suggested something deeper, a people's rejection of their king, and possibly a fear of what his continued influence might mean, even from beyond the grave. Throughout the early 20th century, several expeditions returned to Amarna to study and document the site in greater detail. In 1931, a German team led by Ludwig Borchardt, the same man who had discovered the famous bust of Nefertiti, documented unusual inscriptions around the shrine. Some were simple prayers to the Aten, but others were warnings, pleas that no one disturb the resting place of the pharaoh and his vision. While not curses in the traditional sense, the inscriptions carried an emotional weight, as though the past still cried out against its erasure. Despite these warnings, excavations continued. In the 1950s, a team led by English archaeologist John Pendlebury worked extensively in Amarna. Pendlebury was passionate, energetic, and determined to uncover the truth of Akhenaten's reign. But in 1941, during the Second World War, Pendlebury, who had also served in intelligence work, was captured and executed by Axis forces in Crete. Though unrelated to his archaeological work, his tragic death fed into the growing mystique of the Amarna site. Some whispered that he had spent too long in the forgotten city, had unearthed secrets best left buried. Modern archaeologists are more skeptical of curses, but they do not deny the power that Amarna holds. The site's haunting architecture, the radical nature of its theology, and the abruptness with which it was abandoned all combine to create an aura of quiet dread. Even now, some researchers report feelings of unease while working in the shrine. The silence is deep. The wind whistles through shattered pillars. The Aten, long forgotten, watches still. What is perhaps most eerie about the pharaoh's shrine at Amarna is not what we know, but what we don't. So much of Akhenaten's reign remains a mystery. Was he a religious visionary or a mad tyrant? Did his worship of a faceless sun god reflect spiritual enlightenment, or was it a descent into megalomania? Why did the city collapse so quickly after his death? And what happened to the people who worshipped there, who built temples, made offerings, and vanished into the sand? There are no clean answers, but perhaps that's what keeps the story alive. The pharaoh's shrine at Amarna may not be cursed in the way Hollywood imagines, but it is a place burdened with memory. A place where ancient hopes were buried under royal heresy, and where the silence of the desert is not quite empty. Today, the ruins remain open to scholars and travelers alike. Visitors walk among fallen walls, past fractured pillars still etched with the rays of the Aten. The shrine itself is quiet, but the carvings remain, catching the light in strange, almost reverent ways. It's easy to feel like you're being watched, not in menace, but in memory, as though the city and its pharaoh are waiting for someone to understand, and maybe they always will. As the winds of Egypt shift across the Valley of the Kings, scattering sand like whispers of the past, the story of Amarna fades into memory, but the desert is never truly silent. And further south along the Nile, another tale waits to be told, one far more famous and far more feared. This is the story of Tutankhamun, a boy buried in gold. A name lost to history, then unearthed again beneath a seal unbroken for over 3,000 years. It is the tale of a tomb unlike any other, and the strange and chilling legacy it left behind, a legacy that some call a curse. Tutankhamun was little more than a footnote in ancient Egyptian history when the 20th century dawned. A boy king who ruled briefly during a time of political chaos and religious reversal. He came to power after the death of Akhenaten, the so-called heretic pharaoh who had cast down the old gods in favor of the sun disk, the Aten. When Tutankhamun took the throne at just 9 years old, his advisors quickly reinstated the traditional gods. The temples of Amun were reopened. The 18 temples were shuttered. The name of Akhenaten was condemned. Tutankhamun in truth was a puppet, a figurehead controlled by powerful priests and generals. He died young, barely 18, likely from a mix of congenital deformities, malaria, and a possible leg fracture that had become infected. His death was sudden, unexpected, and perhaps politically inconvenient. And so, the boy king was buried in haste, interred in a tomb far smaller than expected for royalty. A tomb that was, by all accounts, meant for someone else. And then, the world forgot him. For over 3,000 years, Tutankhamun's tomb lay hidden beneath the rubble of later burials. Unlike the grand tombs that were looted in antiquity, his remained largely undisturbed, lost to time, waiting. Until 1922, British archaeologist Howard Carter had been searching for the tomb for years. Funded by Lord Carnarvon, he had combed the Valley of the Kings, meticulously, convinced that the tomb of the boy king still lay undiscovered. Many thought him mad. Most of the valley had been picked clean by treasure hunters and scholars alike. But Carter persisted. Then came the step. A sunken stairway buried beneath centuries of dust and debris. At its base, a sealed doorway bearing the faint impression of a royal cartouche, Tutankhamun. Carter had found it. What lay beyond would stun the world. When Carter peered through a small hole in the doorway, holding up a candle to the darkness within, he uttered words that would become legend. Yes, wonderful things. Inside, the tomb glittered with unimaginable treasures. Golden shrines stacked like nesting dolls. Chariots, thrones, jewelry, statues of gods, and deeper within, the sarcophagus of the boy king himself, still untouched by time. The discovery captivated the globe. King Tut, a forgotten ruler, was now the most famous pharaoh in history. But the marvel quickly gave way to something darker. Just months after the tomb's opening, Lord Carnarvon, Carter's patron and close friend, died from an infected mosquito bite that had become gangrenous. At the exact moment of his death, it was said, all the lights in Cairo went out. Thousands of miles away in England, his dog howled and dropped dead. The newspapers, hungry for drama, seized upon the idea of a pharaoh's curse. The legend was born, and the deaths continued. Sir Archibald Douglas Reed, who x-rayed the mummy before it was unwrapped, died shortly afterward. George J. Gould, a wealthy American financier who visited the tomb, contracted a fever and died within weeks. Arthur Mace, a member of Carter's team, succumbed to arsenic poisoning. Others suffered heart attacks, strokes, strange illnesses, or inexplicable accidents. To skeptics, it was a coincidence. To believers, it was ancient justice. The ancient Egyptians had a deep belief in the power of the afterlife. Tombs were sealed to protect the soul on its journey. Inscriptions warned against trespassers. Some believed that ancient priests infused the tombs with poisons or spiritual protections, traps for the greedy and the curious. Tut's tomb bore no clear curse inscribed on its walls. But perhaps it didn't need one. The sheer sanctity of the burial, the sacred silence sealed for millennia, was warning enough. Even Carter, who never publicly embraced the idea of a curse, admitted strange things had occurred. He kept a pet canary, a small bird, whose song cheered the workers. There is a legend that once the tomb was opened, the bird was found dead in its cage, killed, they said, by a cobra that had somehow entered the house. The cobra, symbol of the pharaoh's divine power, had returned. As more artifacts were removed and catalogued, the unease grew. The tomb was small, cramped, yet the walls were painted with vibrant scenes of the king's journey into the afterlife. The golden mask, placed over his mummified face, was serene, beautiful, but distant, cold. And when the mummy itself was examined, a disturbing discovery emerged. Tut had been burned. Not in life, but in death. His body had been hastily embalmed, and the mixture of oils and linen had caused a chemical reaction. The boy king had been scorched in his own sarcophagus. Some called it an accident. Others whispered that something had gone wrong during the burial, something that demanded haste, secrecy, and silence. Carter himself died many years later, in 1939, from lymphoma. He had lived a long life, free of any curse, but even he admitted near the end that some things he had seen could not be explained. The idea of the curse outlived them all. In the decades since, Scientists have proposed rational explanations: mold spores sealed in ancient tombs, toxic fungi, psychological suggestion, even radiation from certain minerals. And yet the air around the tomb, thick, dry, almost humming with tension, cannot be measured by instruments. Visitors to the tomb today still speak of a strange stillness, a feeling that you are not alone, that something ancient and vast is watching. And then there's the question of why Tut's tomb was so unique. Why was it the only royal tomb to remain nearly intact? Why was it buried beneath the rubble of another? Why, in an age of grand mortuary temples and long corridors leading to eternity, was the boy king hidden away in what appears to be a tomb designed for someone else? Some Egyptologists now believe that the tomb was originally intended for a woman, perhaps Nefertiti herself. Others suggest that Tut's burial was a desperate act in a time of political instability, when his death could not be widely mourned, and his body had to be disposed of quickly. If true, then the golden treasures within were less a celebration of a life well lived, and more an attempt to restore divine order after a sudden and potentially suspicious death. And so the tomb became a paradox, a place of splendor, born of secrecy and fear. Tut's fame, now immortal, was never part of the plan. He was meant to be forgotten. His name was erased like Akhenaten's, his lineage ended. But fate, guided by desert winds and a British archaeologist's obsession, had other ideas. Today, Tut's treasures are housed in museums, his golden mask staring out at millions who visit, each hoping to touch a fragment of the ancient world. But those who have walked the length of the original tomb, past the stone guardians and into the burial chamber, say something else remains behind. A presence. A weight. The curse, perhaps, is not in death, but in memory. For in defying the silence of the tomb, we awaken something more enduring than gold. We gave a forgotten king a voice, and in doing so we may never sleep quite as soundly again. As the shadow of Tutankhamun's curse stretches across the collective imagination, there's another place buried deeper, darker, less known, yet perhaps more unsettling. South of Cairo, in the ancient burial grounds of Saqqara, lies something different, not a pharaoh's tomb, not a glittering shrine, but a tunnel carved into the bedrock, leading to silence and stone. It is the Serapeum, and what waits inside, it has baffled minds for generations. Unlike the celebrated tombs of kings, the Serapeum does not whisper of royal grandeur or treasure hoards. It speaks of something older, stranger. It is a necropolis, not for men, but for bulls, massive, sacred Apis bulls, once considered living incarnations of divine power. Here, deep underground, those creatures were laid to rest in colossal stone coffins, each more enormous than the last, entombed in a space that feels less like a tomb and more like a riddle carved into the earth itself. The entrance is humble, easily missed, half sunken in desert dust, but step beyond it, and you're swallowed into a maze of rock. The walls, cool and silent, lead to a corridor so long it disappears into darkness. Flickering torchlight reveals chambers branching left and right, and inside each, a sarcophagus that defies understanding. These aren't like any other coffins in Egypt. They're the size of small trucks, carved from solid granite, each weighing as much as 70 tons, and they were placed there, with impossible precision, in spaces that seem too narrow to allow such work. Even modern engineers shake their heads at the logistics. How were these monoliths cut, polished, and transported miles across the desert? How were they lowered into the chambers, sealed flush with such perfection that even now you can barely slide a knife blade into the seam? The answers are lost, buried in time, just like the bulls they held. The Apis bull was more than sacred, it was divine, chosen from birth for its rare markings. The bull lived a life of ritual and honor in Memphis, the ancient capital of Lower Egypt. When it died, its death marked a national event, followed by funerary rites that rivaled those of royalty. But while the ceremonies above the ground were known, what took place after the bull was carried down into the Serapeum, into those silent tunnels, remains a mystery. Some of the sarcophagi are empty now, their contents lost to time or looters. Others remain sealed, undisturbed since they were placed there over 3,000 years ago. The interiors are pitch black and echo with an unnatural quiet. There is no gold, no hieroglyphic narrative on the walls. Only the stark, unadorned mass of stone, as if the builders wanted to leave no explanation. Only questions. When the Serapeum was rediscovered in 1850 by Auguste Mariette, he hadn't even been looking for it. He was drawn by the sight of a half-buried sphinx, one of many that once lined a grand avenue. Digging deeper, he struck stone, and then darkness. He found the tunnels, untouched for centuries, and within them, the sarcophagi. Many of them had no inscriptions, no names, just perfect, massive containers for something ancient and powerful. Some say the Serapeum was a place of honor, others believe it was more than that, a spiritual engine, designed not just to bury but to contain. The Apis bulls, after all, were considered not just sacred, but dangerous in their divinity. They were gods walking among men, and gods in every mythology demand reverence and fear in equal measure. What's especially chilling is how the Serapeum feels alive. Unlike the royal tombs, where the air is stale and death hangs heavy, the Serapeum is different. The moment you step into its corridors, you feel pressure, a presence, not oppressive, but undeniable. People report odd sensations, a sudden drop in temperature, an almost metallic taste in the air, the strange feeling of being watched. Flashlights flicker, cameras glitch. Some visitors can't bring themselves to go past the first turn in the hallway. There are stories too, quiet ones, passed between archaeologists and local guides, of men who tried to open the sealed sarcophagi and never returned, of strange humming sounds heard late at night, of voices echoing faintly through the stone. Nothing ever confirmed, of course, just enough to make people nervous, just enough to suggest the Serapeum is still watching. Then there are the theories. Some say the Serapeum was a technological marvel, designed to resonate with energy, either spiritual or mechanical. Others argue it was a storage place for something forgotten, not bulls but knowledge, or worse, power. Some of the most fringe voices have even claimed the Serapeum wasn't Egyptian at all, but older, repurposed by the Egyptians from a time no one remembers. They point to the precision of the granite cuts, the unnatural scale of the chambers, and ask the same question: why go to such effort for animals? But perhaps the most compelling mystery is this: what was the Serapeum meant to protect? Egyptian belief was deeply structured. Death had a pathway, a journey, gods who received the soul. But the Serapeum doesn't follow those rules. It offers no map, no guidance for the dead, just silence, stone, and containment. Whatever the ancient priests feared or revered about the bulls, they entombed them not with myth, but with weight. They sealed them inside granite boxes, as if to lock something away. Even the name Serapeum is a blending of faiths. The Greek god Serapion, a later fusion of Osiris and the Apis bull, was a deity born of politics, designed to unify Egyptian and Greek religious thought. His temple in Alexandria was a place of enlightenment, but here, beneath Saqqara, the fusion seems darker. There is no enlightenment in the tunnels, no light at all, save what you bring with you. And it is very easy to imagine, once inside, that you are not alone. Time has done little to weaken the Serapeum's spell, though some of the chambers are open to the public. Others remain closed. Some are too unstable. Some, perhaps, are better left undisturbed. Even in our age of satellites and scanners, much of the complex remains unexplored, its deeper reaches untouched, since antiquity. Whether due to fear, respect, or logistical difficulty, the full extent of the Serapeum is still a mystery. The Apis cult eventually faded, lost to shifting powers and changing gods. But the Serapeum endured, a stone memory of a belief system that merged animal, deity, and earth. It's not flashy, there is no gold to dazzle the eye, but that's what makes it more disturbing. It is grand in a way that doesn't seek attention. It is silent, patient, and hidden. An architecture of restraint, built for something sacred and terrifying. And maybe that's what keeps people coming back, not to find treasure, but to find answers. What is buried here is not just bulls. It is a philosophy, a fear, a power, that we still do not fully understand. And the Serapeum waits, deep beneath the desert, for someone brave or foolish enough to ask the right questions. Perhaps the tombs of kings were made for memory. The Serapeum feels made for forgetting, but it has not been forgotten, and neither, it seems, has whatever lies inside. The Serapeum's passageways, lined with immense stone sarcophagi, and cloaked in a silence that seems to listen more than echo, leave behind a whisper of ancient power. But Egypt is a land where mysteries do not end. They only deepen. Across the sands lies another tomb with unsettling effects. It belongs not to a pharaoh or a god-king, but to a man named Khentika Ikhekhi. His name would mean little to most. He was not a ruler, not a warrior of myth or a priest of renown. He lived during the 6th dynasty, over 4,000 years ago, in the twilight years of Egypt's Old Kingdom. Khentika was a high official, a judge, a man of influence and bureaucracy, and yet, the tomb he left behind carries something more powerful than gold or jewels. It carries a threat. The desert at Saqqara is quiet, but not empty. It stretches in long, pale waves around the stepped ruins of Djoser's pyramid, a place where time folds in on itself. Walk far enough from the main causeways, away from the tourists and the carefully labeled signs, and the sand changes character. It thickens, as if holding on to secrets. Here lies Khentika's tomb, a mastaba, a rectangular stone superstructure, once brilliant with white limestone, now muted and forgotten. But it is not the architecture that draws unease. It is the words carved within. As for all men who shall enter this my tomb, impure, there will be judgment. An end shall be made for him. I shall seize his neck like a bird. I shall cast the fear of myself into him. These words are among the earliest examples of a written tomb curse in Egypt. Not a poetic metaphor, not a vague divine warning. This is a personal threat. It is direct, almost intimate. The owner of the tomb is not appealing to the gods for justice. He is promising it himself. Why would a man of law and order feel the need to threaten the living from beyond the grave? To understand this, one must look at the time in which Khentika lived. The Old Kingdom, long seen as a golden age of pyramid building and order, was beginning to fray at the edges. Central authority was weakening. Regional governors, nomarchs, were growing in power. The pharaoh, once a living god, had become a distant figure, no longer absolute. Tomb robbery was not just a fear, it was a reality. Entire families would conspire to break into tombs and strip them of their contents, desecrating the carefully arranged chambers meant to secure eternity. For someone like Khentika, who had spent his life serving the state, preserving the concept of cosmic order, this growing lawlessness would have felt like a betrayal. Perhaps he saw the decay of the world he knew, and in desperation, sought to enforce order in death if it could no longer be maintained in life. His tomb is a study in duality. At the entrance the scenes are dignified, offerings being made, Khentika standing with calm authority, receiving gifts from family and servants. But deeper inside, the tone shifts. The inscription with the curse is not decorative. It is carved plainly, without ornament, as though rushed or whispered in warning. There is no plea for eternal sustenance, no poetic invocation of gods, only a declaration, "I will come for you." And that raises the question, what did Khentika believe he would become in death? The ancient Egyptians did not see the afterlife as passive. The deceased retained agency, power, presence. Tombs were more than graves. They were eternal houses, charged with spiritual energy. Offerings, rituals, and spells served not just to protect the body, but to maintain the personality. What the Egyptians called the Khain, Khentika's Khain, it seems, was not content with mere remembrance. It wanted defense. It wanted vengeance. Some Egyptologists have speculated that such early curses were psychological tools, meant to ward off potential robbers through fear. But in the hushed, close air of the Mastaba's burial chamber, that explanation feels thin. The curse doesn't read like a bluff. It reads like intent. And the imagery, seizing the neck like a bird, is not abstract. It's violent. It's visceral. It suggests speed, precision, and suffocation. It suggests that Khentika would be watching. Over the centuries, the tomb remained buried, forgotten beneath the dust and detritus of dynasties. When it was rediscovered in modern times, there was no grand moment of unveiling. There were no trumpets, no treasures, just stone, silence, and a cold wind that felt out of place. The workers who uncovered the tomb reportedly spoke of the unusual air, heavy and still. Despite the open desert, tools were misplaced. Measurements blurred. Some of the photographs from the early excavation were said to have overexposed strangely, as though the film had been briefly scorched. Nothing definitive, nothing you could prove, but the archaeologists were uneasy. Unlike the tombs of pharaohs, Khentika's burial site was modest. There were no golden sarcophagi or jeweled headdresses, but there was something stranger. In one of the inner chambers, an offering table had been smashed, not by time or shifting stone, but by force. Some theorized it had been done by tomb robbers, but others noted how everything else had been left untouched. The body was undisturbed. The walls still spoke. Only the offering space had been desecrated, as if someone or something had objected to the act of giving. A few fragments of statue remained near the head of the sarcophagus, chipped and faceless. No inscriptions on them. But they didn't belong to the original burial. Their style was different. Later, as if someone had once returned to the tomb, centuries after its sealing, to leave something behind, or to beg for forgiveness. No formal record of a curse ever affecting anyone tied to Khentika's tomb exists, not like the stories that followed Howard Carter's crew. There were no dramatic deaths or plagues, no headlines. But those who worked near the site often refused to stay long. One restorer claimed he heard a voice murmuring from the walls during a solitary inspection. Another, a young student, left his field notes behind and never returned, abandoning archaeology altogether. Most dismissed these as desert hallucinations, the product of heat and fatigue. But the stories persisted, passed on in half-joking tones around campfires and dig sites. And perhaps that is the true power of Khentika's curse. Not in death tolls or cinematic theatrics, but in the quiet dread it inspires. A warning carved into stone 4,000 years ago, still able to make a man hesitate before stepping into shadow. Even today, standing before the tomb, the air feels different. There is no breeze, no sound, just the shifting of sand and the weight of presence. You can feel the judgment, not divine, but personal, not from gods, but from a man long dead, who dared to command eternity. There are many curses in ancient Egypt. Some were symbolic, others ceremonial, but Khentika's is not a spell. It is a statement, a promise, and somehow, that makes it more chilling. So, as the sun dips low over Saqqara, casting long shadows across the broken stone, the Mastaba of Khentika Ikhekhi sits in silence. No guards, no treasure, just a name, a threat, and a warning etched into limestone, daring time itself to test it. And time, it seems, still hasn't dared. The desert has always been a place of endings. It swallows monuments, erodes memory, and lets time drift unburdened by the noise of the living. As the sands of Saqqara quietly reclaim Khentika Ikhekhi's tomb, another rests far to the south, nestled within the cliffs of the Valley of the Kings. It is less ancient, but its silence feels heavier, less like absence and more like suppression. There, carved into the stone under the searing Egyptian sun, is a tomb that has perplexed archaeologists, confounded historians, and left behind a trail of unease. Tomb KV 55. It is a number that holds no grandeur, no name, no carved monument announcing who lies within. But KV 55 is not an ordinary tomb, and its mystery begins not with what was found, but with what was missing. When it was uncovered in 1907, the expedition had hoped for clarity. Instead, they found contradictions. A single burial chamber, sparsely decorated, containing a bizarre mix of funerary items from different sources and styles, all seemingly hurried or reused, and in the center of it all, an unmarked, desecrated coffin. The tomb had been sealed, but not with reverence. The entrance was crude, unstable, as though it had been resealed not once, but twice, each time with a different intent. The first may have been a burial, the second, a cover-up. Inside, the sarcophagus had once borne royal insignia, but the cartouches had been methodically erased, hacked away with sharp tools. The name, whoever it belonged to, was not just removed, but destroyed. To the ancient Egyptians, erasing a name was an act of spiritual violence. Without it, the soul could not be called, could not exist in the afterlife. This was more than desecration. It was damnation, but the body was there. A withered, decaying form, its skeleton broken, its skull detached and resting unnaturally, as if disturbed in some desperate attempt to make it unrecognizable. For decades, the identity of the mummy would be debated. Was it Semenkhara, the elusive and short-reigned successor to Akhenaten? Was it Akhenaten himself, the radical pharaoh who had dared to defy the priesthood and dismantle the gods? Akhenaten. The name still carries weight, even now. Under his reign, temples of Amun were closed, statues defaced, old gods erased. To some, he was a visionary, to others, a heretic. His reign was one of spiritual revolution and political upheaval, and after his death, the backlash was swift. His memory was targeted with what the Egyptians called the deliberate obliteration of identity. If Akhenaten's enemies had tried to erase him from history, KV55 suggests they may have tried to erase him from eternity as well. But who moved the body to this tomb? And why? Theories abound. Some believe that Akhenaten was originally buried in Amarna, the city he built from sand, and that his bones were later brought to Thebes by loyal followers or family, perhaps even his son Tutankhamun, who would eventually reverse his father's reforms. If true, the act may have been one of reconciliation, but then, the removal of his name from the coffin suggests otherwise. It is a tomb at war with itself, a place both of reverence and of rejection. The coffin itself is a masterpiece of contradiction, gilded wood, inlaid with fine detail, but altered. The faceplate had been smashed, the cartouches replaced. It was made for a king, but later defiled by someone who wanted to make sure the occupant could never rise again. The 4 canopic jars found alongside it, intended to hold the organs of the deceased, bore the likeness of a woman, Queen Kia, Akhenaten's lesser-known wife. But Kia herself had been erased from most records. Her name, like his, was dangerous. It is easy to speak of curses in Egypt. They are carved into our imaginations as deeply as they are into stone. But KV55 has no explicit curse, no formal inscription, threatening intruders, no poetic warning like the one found in Khentika's tomb. And yet, those who entered felt it. The tomb was thick with heat, yes, but more than that, it was heavy, as though the very air resisted disturbance. When the excavation team first opened the chamber, their records noted a strange, suffocating stillness. The objects inside were coated in a dense layer of blackened dust, as if fire had once passed through. The walls were bare, no scenes of the afterlife, no hymns, no guidance, just emptiness. For a royal tomb, it was an insult, or perhaps, a prison. The mummy itself began to decay rapidly once exposed. Though already brittle from centuries of heat, its condition worsened unnaturally. A darkening of the bones, an odd, chemical smell that was never fully explained. Several members of the team would later fall ill, not with dramatic headline-making deaths, but with ailments that lingered, resistant to diagnosis. One developed a chronic cough that never ceased. Another, after a brief return to England, suffered hallucinations and night terrors. They reported visions of a narrow, dark corridor filled with the sound of whispering sand. But these are just stories, aren't they? Perhaps. And yet there is a reason KV55 continues to haunt even the most skeptical archaeologists. It is not just what was found, but what was implied. Every artifact is a question. Why was a shrine to Queen Tiri, Akhenaten's mother, found disassembled in the tomb? Why were funerary items linked to multiple individuals, none conclusively tied to the mummy buried together? It is as if KV55 was not built for the dead, but built around the dead, an afterthought. A response to a problem. The Valley of the Kings is home to some of the greatest monuments to human ego ever constructed. Immense corridors, towering sarcophagi, walls lit by the journey of the soul. But KV55 is a whisper, not a declaration. It offers no grandeur, only a sense of unease. It is a tomb that does not welcome, it denies, and whatever the original purpose of its construction, it now serves a different one, to obscure. Even the eventual identification of the mummy did little to settle the matter. DNA analysis in the early 21st century linked the remains to both Amenhotep III and Tutankhamun, confirming a direct familial relationship. But the final name, Akhenaten, still feels like an accusation whispered through time. If it is him, then KV55 is not only a tomb, but a verdict. This is how Egypt punished its traitors, not with execution, but with erasure. Visitors to the site today, though rare, have described a strange pull, not quite dread, but discomfort. The chamber feels off, as though it has been rotated slightly out of time. The air does not circulate as it should. Flash photography often fails. One researcher claimed her watch stopped every time she stepped near the sarcophagus. Another refused to return after dreaming, night after night, of a man with a broken face standing at the foot of her bed. There are no gods watching over KV-55, no Anubis on the wall to guide the soul, no Isis to comfort the dead. Whoever lies within, be it Akhenaten, Semenkagar, or another lost prince, lies alone, and that is perhaps the most frightening aspect of the tomb. Its silence does not protect, it isolates. In this video, we've walked through shadows cast by towering stone, stepped cautiously into the silence of sealed chambers, and felt the weight of centuries pressing down in places where time itself seems to have stopped. From the blinding light of Aten's forgotten city to the chilling depths of Saqqara's stone sarcophagi, the stories left behind by ancient Egypt are more than myths. They are echoes, and in those echoes, we've seen patterns too uncanny to ignore. Whether you believe in curses or coincidence, one thing is certain: the past is not as quiet as it seems. So as we leave these haunted sands behind, remember that Egypt's greatest mysteries may not lie in what we've uncovered, but in what still waits beneath the earth, undisturbed. And if these tales of curses, forgotten gods, and eerie ruins sent a chill down your spine, make sure to subscribe for more stories that lurk just beyond the veil of history. Leave a like, share your thoughts in the comments, and join us next time as we journey even deeper into the world's most unsettling legends. Until then, stay curious.